Welcome back, adventurers, once again to another episode of Let's Play ChäoS Head. And in the last episode, Takumi was busy searching in an online thread regarding a recently revealed aspect of Ayase Kishimoto's past, or rather the fact that she turned out to be a patient at a psychiatric ward known as the Arcart Group Medical Association, or group, or whatever it's called. Of course, the internet trolls have used this as a means of denouncing Fez and Phantasm and declaring that they're going to disband, which I don't think they are anytime soon if Ayase herself has anything to say about it. Unfortunately for Takumi, he received a phone call at the worst possible hour, and to make matters worse, he made the mistake of answering said phone call, which happened to be the same mysterious number that he tried to prank Nanami with and ultimately ended up failing. And the same message played as before, the song Let Me Pass, along with a very loud buzzer. This time, however, something drastically different happened, and instead of just blowing out his eardrums, the phone call ended up all but destroying Takumi's audio-visual system entirely, which was definitely not what it did last time. But here in Class B of Suume Academy, we're back with Yua Kusunoki for the first time in ages. And yeah, something has happened. Something that has happened along the same time as that phone call. Countless students had collapsed. Their eyes rolled back and they foamed at the mouth, and their bodies twitched all over. Unless they all happen to be listening to cell phones at this time, which I don't think are permitted in classrooms when lessons are in session. Something else is definitely going on, but I would wager that it's connected to whatever it is Takumi went through. A number of others had curled into balls, pressing down on their heads as if they were suffering. That's because they are suffering. The remaining students had stood up, though they were supposed to be in the middle of classes, and were filing out into the hallway. The teacher took no notice of them as he frantically attempted to help the fallen students. Well, kudos to him. Everyone who had come out into the hallway was raising surprised voices, but none of their words entered Yua's head. I wonder why. The cell phone in her skirt pocket had been vibrating for some time now. Upon noticing it at last, she dragged her hand towards her pocket. Who might be calling Yua, I wonder? She tried to stand up, but she staggered and slid down past her chair. Crouching, she leaned back against the wall. After correcting the position of her slipping glasses, she pressed a button to take the call and put her phone to her ear.
はい。あ、はい。はあ。はい。一応大丈夫です。
Yua made a grimace and pressed at her forehead as she answered. Wonder who might be calling her. Her family or somebody else? I doubt we'll know the answer this soon, but both the commotion of her classmates in the hallway and her teacher's voice as he called, "Hey, hold on," to his prostrate students sounded to her like something taking place very far away.
あ、はい。え、ええ。
At least Yua is fairly responsive.
あなたは、
Yua doesn't recognize who's on the other line.
はい。はい。 そうですか。それで、
Blanching Yua gulped. She covered the phone with her hands and dropped her voice. Her tone was clearly unsettled.
そんなわけないんです。だって、本当は。
Having said that much, Yua fumbled with her words and hung her head.
本当は、私、だったのに。
The racket from the corridor grew louder still. Everyone was looking in the same direction and pointing and wearing anxious expressions. I am curious as to the context of Yua's phone conversation. But I suppose I'll have to wait. The hallway windows rattled as if a strong wind were blowing against them.
ええ、はい。そうです。私の妹です。
Wait, Yua's little sister?
はい。わかりました。
Something rather unfortunate has happened. Feebly bowing her head at the end, as though the person she was speaking to was right in front of her, or were right in front of her, Yua cut the connection. And she raised her head, casting a glance at the windows beyond which everyone was pointing. There was definitely a lot of commotion.
空が。
What about the sky? It was almost as if someone had dropped white paint onto water, or into water. Yeah, that's not... at first glance that might look like a white cloud or a mist is covering the familiar blue sky. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the reverse. That is to say, the white isn't obscuring the blue is literally evaporating into white. Now that is a cause for concern. The sky that had been a dirty blue was fading to white. Yeah, I called it. That white spread at considerable speed. Blurring, it had invaded its way through the sky. Now this is definitely a phenomenon that goes beyond the scope of even the new gen madness.
白く染まっていく。
I think that's all you had to say on that subject. Oh, we're chapter 6, Noah. Oh my word. Well, we've finally done it. We've finally reached chapter 6, which means from this point forward, up until at least the next 2 chapters, I cannot load my save, ladies and gentlemen. So here's where things are going to get a bit interesting, because yeah, during the different emotional pathways that we're going to be experiencing from this point forward, we're only going to experience one of them, because I have absolutely no intention of loading and reloading countless times and then having to start all the way back from the end of chapter 5 every single time to do this. So that's the way things are going to be from here on out. And also, I think I'm going to do that post chapter 8 as well. Otherwise, it is going to be incredibly tedious. But back to the beginning of chapter 6, Noah. Under ordinary circumstances, being released from a long investigatory headquarters meeting would have left Yazuji Ban feeling refreshed. But instead, his demeanor shows quite the opposite expression. But that certainly couldn't be said of today. when he left the other detectives and went up to the windowsill to irritatedly place a call to his junior. His partner, Sua, hadn't shown up at today's investigation meeting. Ban's personal feeling about it was, sure, even I want to skip, but what are you thinking, abandoning your senior like this? That's the first time that you've actually exhibited such emotion there, but yeah, Sua's absence is peculiar, especially at a crucial point in time. At first glance, Sua seemed like a frivolous sort of man, but in reality he was a serious detective with some real backbone to him. Considering how Ban valued him, his ditching the meeting today came unexpectedly. Ban had tried to contact him countless times, but he always ended up getting his voicemail. Of all the times. What with having heard something rather disturbing from Momose 2 days ago, Ban was having a hard time settling down, and with good reason. Of course, if his higher-ups and his peers got wind of what he was investigating, yeah, being thrown off the case would certainly be the least of his worries. Today was full of annoyance after annoyance. Aside from the thing about Sua, there was also the fact that when he reported about the G raid in the meeting earlier, Matsunaga shot him down with, "We don't have the time to deal with idle gossip." Of course. Well, we could chalk it up to the higher-ups just plainly ignoring that particular angle altogether and focusing on other details. But given Professor Otoa's murder and the New Gen incidents, something tells me that they're part of the cover-up. Please don't let things get any more aggravating than this. Hate to break it to you, Yazuji, but things are about to get more aggravating than this. Take my word for it. Ban let out a small sigh as he waved his fan in front of his face. Which is when his call went through and he heard his junior's voice. About time. Unfortunately, there's distortion. The connection was terribly low quality. Ban had scratched his short hair, wondering where in the boondocks Sua had gone off to. Looks like Sua has taken matters into his own hands. Points for initiative, but points deducted for timing. When Ban yelled, Sua's voice grew inaudible, and for some time rustling noises continued in exchange. Slightly better connection there. Not that Ban is one to talk, but what Sua is doing could very well be described as insubordination. He couldn't praise Sua for taking unauthorized independent action, since Ban himself was constantly taking unauthorized independent action. However, he couldn't help smiling dryly at the thought that maybe all their time together had led him to having a bad influence on Sua, its junior. Also, first time for that sentiment too. Decisive evidence, you say? Well, if it's genuine, it's gold dust. The color in Ban's eyes shifted. You wouldn't be the first to admit that, but then again... Sewer refusing a direct order from Ban?
ああ、おい、ちょっと待て。大丈夫っす。任せ。あ、座。
Oh dear. Right then, the area at his feet began shaking. The shaking gradually grew fiercer and fiercer, to the point that he couldn't stand up straight. Ban crouched in place without a moment's hesitation. The other detectives, who at first had been unfazed, finally picked up on the gravity of the situation and ducked down or wormed their way under tables. What impeccable timing this earthquake has. The clock hanging on the wall, the pens and paper cups set on the table, the projection equipment, they all dropped to the floor one after the other, sending up violent crashing noises. The two whiteboards lined up at the head of the conference room also collapsed. It was almost like being in a plane that just entered turbulence. However, there is nothing natural about this earthquake. So it seemed to Ban. It felt as if his feet weren't meeting the ground. His entire body rocked, sending him swinging around from side to side. This could conceivably be a 5 or 6 magnitude earthquake. Had the Great Kanto earthquake arrived at last, now of all times? There's more to it than that. That was when something slammed into Ban's head. He cried out at once. It wasn't that someone had physically struck him. It was an intense headache. Yeah, whatever Takumi Nishijo experienced, everyone in Shibuya is experiencing that same phenomenon. Suddenly screams resounded through the conference room. Gritting his teeth, Ban raised his head to see one of the jurisdictional detectives holding his head in his arms and writhing. And then he flopped over powerlessly, like a puppet. Most of the other detectives' faces were contorted with pain, and they were pressing down on their temples or cradling their heads. What was this headache that had matched nothing like he had ever experienced before? Something tells me you're not going to like the answer to that question. Ban had no way of knowing whether or not it was connected to the earthquake. Oh, it's connected, all right. Trust me on this. It is very much connected. The shaking finally started to dissipate. Ban looked through the window with foggy eyes. It overflowed with milky white light. The brilliance of it prevented him from keeping his eyes open. Now we're back with Takumi again. Assaulted by head-splitting pain, I opened my eyes to a very grisly sight indeed. Yeah. Of all the things to happen, I realized I lay collapsed face down in the middle of my room, and you're not the only one. I tried to get up, but as I did, pain raced through me as if my headache had infected the rest of my body, and I immediately moaned, and borderline fainted in agony. After about 5 minutes worth of writhing around, when the pain had started to subside minutely, I grabbed one of the legs of my bed to pull myself up. I used a hand to wipe the greasy sweat off my forehead. Yeah, There might be some pros to living in a shipping container on top of a building, but this is not one of them. The room was in a disastrous state, as if a storm had passed through it. All of my brides who'd been lined up on their shelf were now toppled over or had fallen to the floor. The bed was tilted, and the manga volumes and the Roger packages were piled up on, and it had come tumbling down, scattering across the floor. What the hell had happened? An earthquake, a very serious one. If I remembered correctly, someone had called me, let me pass the plate through the phone, and as before it had transformed into something like an ambulance siren by the end. Right. I heard the ground roar at the same time the buzzer sounded, and immediately afterward I had been consumed by the sensation that my entire body was boiling and melting. You weren't the only one feeling this effect. I had absolutely no memory of whatever came next. My mind went blank. Probably because you fell unconscious. Mercifully so. It couldn't be. Electromagnetic attack by Shogun? An electromagnetic attack by someone is more like it. Maybe Shogun was capable of carrying out the same sort of things as the system described in the patent I'd found earlier. Such thoughts made me shudder. And during my headache, I looked up at the screen. I didn't see anything there, of course. If he were recording my thoughts, it'd be from a satellite's distance, upper atmosphere orbit. Yeah, but what just happened, Takumi Nishijo, wasn't just a psychological attack. Because psychological attacks don't normally affect physicality as well.
いくらなんでもそんなはずないよ。
At least Takumi's brain isn't so scrambled that he can't see the contradiction in that logic, which I'm glad he does. But judging by Senna's tone when she told me all those things, it had almost sounded like the system in that patent had already been put into actual use and was being abused by certain people. And hint, it already is being abused by those certain people. If one of those certain people was Shogun, there is another certain people that are abusing that power. Nozomi. Of course, Takumi doesn't realize that yet. No, that's impossible. Whatever the case, it was way too much of a logical leap. But yet this phenomena, while illogical, definitely happened. An old man who looked like he might keel over any minute now couldn't have access to an orbital satellite. Or did it mean he had to be one of the key people in some kind of governmental project? Scaring myself with my own delusions wouldn't change anything. It was a fact that something had occurred, so I figured I would look it up online. About that. That might prove easier said than done. And I crawled up to my PC, my head throbbing.
あれ
I was positive I'd left it on, which meant that it wouldn't make any sense if my Sarah Tan screensaver weren't being displayed on the monitor, but the screen was pitch black. Well, that's terrible, but I'm actually surprised the screen isn't broken into 1,000 tiny little pieces, because you'd never be able to put them back together again. I hadn't set it to automatically enter standby on its own, so it shouldn't have ended up like this, but oh dear. Well, at least the PC itself was intact. Unfortunately, the electrical systems might not be so fortunate. My consciousness was clouded. My body remained limp. It was a struggle just to stand. Clenching my teeth to put up with it, I moved the mouse. No reaction. Next, I tried pressing the power button. The hard disk started making a crunching sound. Well, that's power. That's good. I plopped myself deep into my chair. As I waited for the PC to start up, I reached urgently for my cell phone, which still sat where I'd left it on the table. I checked the time.
13時
Before I received that phone call, while I was browsing through info about Ayase on that channel, what time had it been again? When I put my head to work, the stabbing pain grew louder. I wasn't really paying attention. What time had it been? Think, remember. It had definitely been, yeah, it shouldn't have been noon yet. Which meant...
1時間以上も気絶してた
certainly seems like it. Or else, like a sleepwalker, I've been drifting around somewhere for an hour. If you could make it out of this rubble in that state, I would have been very impressed, also concerned.
僕は無遊病じゃない
No, you were very much unconscious. I shook my head to keep my thoughts from sinking in a negative direction again. The resulting pang made my field of sight waver dizzily. It was as if a lump of lead had been stuffed into the center of my head. When I took a glance at the monitor...
おいマジで
Huh. An error system. But, bad as things might look now, Takumi, not all that bad. Could have been worse. Could this be a hard disk error?
嘘だそんなのありえないあっちゃダメだそんなことになったら全てが終わる
The things would definitely be over if your PC was actually physically destroyed. My gigs of 18 plus more artwork, my Roger save data, my bookmarks to the sites I made the rounds of on a daily basis, my minimum attendance shift chart, and more than anything, that which was more important to me than anything, my Ensu save data. Did this mean that anything and everything had vanished?
くそ
I wanted to scream and cry in frustration. I wanted to bang at the keyboard. I wanted to kick the wall. And even now I wanted to make sure of whether or not a restoration was possible. But my body felt as heavy as always, and my headache wouldn't recede. And it was all I could do to simply to sit limply in my chair and bite my lip. It was over. My life was over. Don't be wallowing your misery just yet. The deletion of my Ensu data meant that I no longer had any reason to live. Everything stopped mattering to me. It all burned away. Just kill me.
待ってタッキー
Serotan, lying fallen over my desk, smiled like an angel and spoke to me gently. all the times to have a delusion.
冷静になりなよ。円数みたいなオンラインのゲームってセーブデータは全部サーバーに保存されてるんじゃない？
By servers, you mean the company administrative servers? Possibly, unless the earthquake that happened here happened there. Although hopefully they're not based in
だ
Shibuya.
からたとえタッキーの PC が壊れてもナイトハルトッチのデータは消えてないはずっしょ。
Ah, oh yeah. Thanks to my misty conscience, I'd forgotten something that basic. I felt like I'd discovered a single ray of hope in the midst of despair. Just what I'd expect from my waifu. I regretted the loss of my precious Mori illustration collection and MP3s which I hadn't backed up, but I had no choice except to give them up. Even so, I wanted to begin reinstalling my OS as soon as I could. And I wanted to confirm the safety of my N2 data with my own eyes as soon as possible. Although before anything happened, I needed the headache currently torturing me to subside. But I very much doubted this pain would do me the favor of disappearing anytime soon. Unfortunately not. And now we're elsewhere. In the streets of Shibuya and the main central plaza. And that is actually going to be where our current episode of Let's Play ChäoS ends. And when we return, adventurers, we shall have to see what comes of the aftermath of this terrible catastrophe. Though something tells me that this is only the prelude to a much worse phenomenon. Call it a hunch. As always, adventurers, until next we meet.